Christos Anesti. As we gather together on this, the feast day of the great martyr and trophy bearer, St. George, we must understand a little bit about military protocols to understand the magnitude of this great saint. For he gave his life in the beginning of the 3rd century during the reign of Diocletian, and his martyrdom was significant not just in the villages, but all over the empire. For St. George was a general who was known as a Heliotikes, which means that he wasn't just in charge of a few people. He had over 1,000 men under his direct command. He was considered part of the Praetorian Guard, the closest and most trusted soldiers of the empire. He would stand with royal guards and with great honor in the Senate chamber presence of the emperor. St. George was beloved by all, his courage acknowledged by everyone. There are stories about how he was called to vanquish a beast that was harassing a village, and they had tried sacrificing young maidens to this beast with no end in sight. According to history, it was in all likelihood a giant saltwater crocodile, but we have taken the image to be a dragon. And after St. George slew this beast, his renown grew even more. This dragon is symbolic of the image of the devil. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that when Emperor Diocletian began the great persecution of Christians, he expected everyone to stand and applaud him, to say, "Well done, noble emperor, that you are persecuting these Christians. They are an aberration on the empire." He certainly did not expect one of his most trusted and valued lieutenants, part of his Praetorian Guard, to stand up in the midst of him and all of the Senate and on you, "How dare you do this to the Christians? They do not deserve this." And he publicly declared that he himself was a Christian. St. George, because of this daring, because of this courage, was subjected to some of the most inhumane tortures possible. He was boiled in oil. He was placed on a rack. He was crushed beneath a stone. He was cut up by a wheel of blades. And yet, after each of these torments, he was miraculously made whole, came to be. And St. George led the way. In the military, the person who is the standard bearer, the trophy bearer, is the person who carries the banner into battle. This is the person that we look to for courage and strength. If we look to one of our American great classics, a statement is said in the song, "Does that banner yet wave?" In other words, is the flag still standing? And during that period of that battle in which that famous song for our America was composed, cannonballs were firing to try to destroy the flag. People died constantly running up and grabbing the flag so that it would not fall. Essentially, if you were target number one, because as long as that flag is standing, it gives hope and courage to everyone around. The person that is the standard bearer is essentially signing his death warrant, because every artillery shell, every sword, every foe on the battlefield is going to try to tear you down. And not because of you, but because of that which you carry. St. George, by becoming the first martyr of this period, is the standard bearer. charging bravely into battle so that those behind him might have courage to stand in the same way that he stood. Because St. George didn't merely die. St. George endured torture after torture after torture. St. George wasn't merely a Christian in a village. St. George was someone that was known throughout the empire. He had power, authority, a beautiful, sterling reputation, and kindness. He had a lot to lose, but he considered it all nothing against the love of Christ. So great is the love of St. George that he is indiscriminate in his blessings and his aid. Even in his hometown of Lida, where his sacred relics are buried, the Muslims come and give honor on this day, because St. George doesn't just work miracles through his intercessions for Christians alone. He does it for everybody. And there have been times when there are more Muslims than Christians coming to pay honor to this great saint because of his love for humanity and his excellence. In the gospel passage you heard today, the Lord says, "If you would be my disciples, love one another." St. George showed us this love, this courage, and as such he is not just known as a great martyr, but the trophy bearer of martyrs, the first among all soldier saints and great martyrs. May his holy intercessions strengthen us in our journey towards salvation. Christ is risen.